Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Let's Talk TEFL podcast. I'm Jackie, and joining me is Jennifer. So
Hi, Jackie.
hey, Jennifer, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I'm good. So, should we jump right into all the details that our listeners want to know? I'm sure.
Let's do it.
All right. So today it's all about Jennifer's wisdom about teaching young learners. So a few different tips. I worked in Hagwons in Korea for a couple of years, but Jennifer is definitely the guru of all things teaching young learners. And I think that I can definitely learn a lot from her for the times when I do teach kids these days. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into the tips, Jennifer. So
All
what's
right, I'll
your number one?
I'll try to live up to that billing. Okay. Well, yeah, I don't have like a list of tips. I'm just gonna sort
Mhm.
of talk a little bit about how you can make your life easier and also like maximize the learning for your students.
Mhm. Okay, that
So I
sounds
think
great.
the first thing is if your school doesn't divide students by age, like if they strictly divide them by level, um, really push back against that. Like 1 or 2 years probably won't make that big of a difference. But I've in the past, like once I had a second grader in a class with sixth graders, and
Oh,
yeah, that was really difficult. She actually had the best English in the class. She was basically fluent, but um, like developmentally, like I mean, she was a second grader. She was yeah, the stories that we read in class like didn't resonate with her. Like none of it was appropriate for a second grader.
mm,
So if you do end up with a student that really is mismatched in age, try and push back against that, because it's not a good learning environment. I don't think, in my humble opinion, it's not a great learning environment for a student who is much younger than the other students. And by the same
mhm.
token, most kids are pretty aware of the age of other kids. Like nobody wants to be like the 15-year-old in a class full of 12-year-olds, for example.
Oh,
So
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
even if the level is appropriate and you have one older student in there, they'll probably be pretty unhappy with that situation.
Yeah, and just kind of related to that, I've taught some kids or teenagers who just because they were quite good at English, maybe their parents or the admin at the school were like, "Oh, they can use an adult textbook or like this very
Yeah.
advanced whatever reading thing for adults." And it was totally inappropriate. So don't fall into that trap of just thinking, "Okay, well they're advanced so they can use adult materials." Yeah, the kids just the kids have to be interested in what they're reading and what they're talking about. So definitely push back on that and yeah, find an age appropriate but advanced level
Yes.
something.
I'll just
Yes.
throw in a quick story of my admin. I taught for quite a long time at one school where the kids were quite high level on average. And the admin were they were basically fluent in English. Like they had all lived in the US for a really long time in their formative years, but I don't think they were widely read. And so they would assign books that, first of all, were beyond the age appropriateness of the kids, but generally also like just beyond the level of the students. Like they
Mhm.
saw it as trying to push the students, to improve. But one of my coworkers ended up being told she had to teach a Kurt Vonnegut book with, I'm going to say 9-year-olds.
What, I don't even understand a Kurt Vonnegut book usually.
But even like beyond that, like they were
Oh,
always totally last minute. So it was literally the first day of the term. She was given a stack of books and they were like, they've just come in. And she's like, great, I haven't prepared. I guess we'll read aloud today. And like the first page had 5 F-bombs or something. And she's
oh
like,
no,
we're
oh
not going to
no,
read out loud
this isn't quite
today.
right. Oh, so funny. All right. So that's definitely a good tip. The age
Yes.
thing and the age appropriate materials.
Yes.
And so what's another one that you have for us? another
Okay,
idea.
so going along with the age thing, the younger the student, the more you should break the lesson up into segments.
Mm-hmm.
You never want the kids to start feeling bored
Mm-hmm.
because then they get distracted. And once they're distracted, you've kind of lost them. So, a really good way to keep their attention is to plan your lesson into little bits. And the little bits can and should like build on each other. Like it should have one central theme, but you just want to kind of switch things up throughout the lesson. So you want to do different activities, maybe move from a group activity to pair work to individual and back again. Maybe get up and do like a little brain break where you have something where they're doing something physical while also using English. There's lots of ways that you can do it, but you don't want to have very young learners working on one task for an entire lesson. Like that's just a disaster waiting to happen.
Okay, so say there's like a class of 6 or 7 year olds,
Yeah.
like grade one. How long would you do a single task for? Like what's kind of your max? Like 2 minutes or 10 minutes, 20 minutes?
It depends
Or,
on the kid,
Mhm.
and you'll get to know your individual students in your class, but I would say with 6 or 7 year olds, I would plan on like a maximum of 5 minutes. But
Mhm.
also at that age, I would have planned like something for the gaps moving from task to task. Like you
Mhm.
need to have everything planned out really well in advance. You need to have all of your stuff laid out on your desk so you aren't stopping and starting as you
Mhm.
transition seamlessly, because your students, the younger they are, the less smoothly they will transition. So
Mhm.
if you have something where they're still sitting at the same seat, but moving from, you know, think to pair to share, for example, then
Mhm.
that shouldn't really require too much on their part. They should be
Mhm.
able to fairly smoothly transition. But if they have to put away one book and take out a different book, or if they've been doing something that involves any crayons or scissors or glue, whatever, like that will take them about 12 times as long as you think it will take. Um, which I think brings me to another point, which is to have really clear routines.
Mhm.
Like every day when they come in, have on the board like the day of the week and the weather or whatever, like some little thing that they know that when they come in, even before that, something like before the class actually starts, like literally when they walk in the door, what do they do first? And that should be the same every day. And then you should start the class in the same format each day. And anytime you're doing the same type of activity, it should be done in the same way. Like every time you use scissors, they should have the same way. Like if you have a class set of scissors, you should have the same students from the same tables getting the scissors for their table, and the same student getting the crayons for their table, and the
Mhm.
same students that gather them up and put them away when they're done.
I
And
like
that
that. I like that for sure.
it takes a little bit of time at the beginning of the semester to get everybody used to that, but it saves so much time and so much frustration the rest of the semester. Like literally, I had systems for everything. Uh, and in addition to sort of systems like that, you can have little songs, and YouTube is great for that. Or, you can just have it on your phone if you don't have YouTube access in class, whatever, where they have the same songs. Like I say I had, there is a cleanup song that
Mhm.
goes with one of the major textbooks. And even at schools where I wasn't using that textbook, when I had really young learners and it was time to pack the bags or, clean up at the end of a craft activity or whatever, I would play the cleanup song and they would know that that meant it was time to put away the craft stuff and, kind of police their area. And, that part of the class was done, or the working day was done, basically.
That is super sorry, that is so helpful to use that cleanup song
Yes.
on YouTube. I love it because that's like one of my major frustrations in teaching big classes or just a class of like a little bit like rowdy kids, depending on who they are, is like getting their attention at the end of an activity without having to like yell like clean up, sit down, be quiet, put your book away, like yeah. So I think just having a song and they're like, oh, it's cleanup time, and you don't even have to say anything is
No.
amazing, I think.
And to go back to the rowdy class and you're trying to get their attention, there are so many like call and response things you can do. I used to do just, 1, 2, 3, look at me. And the students would then say, 1, 2, 3, look at you. Rhyme,
Oh, so funny.
and so you clap, as you say 1, 2, 3, you clap 1, 2, 3, and then you do your thumbs towards yourself, look at me. And then the kids would clap 1, 2, 3, and then they would point their finger guns at the teacher, look at you.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's like really cute. They probably really liked doing that, I think.
Yeah, they did. And if you look on Pinterest, you can find like literally infographics with like 50 call and response for the classrooms or whatever. Okay. So yeah, you don't have to use that one.
Perfect. All right, Jennifer, I have a very serious question about teaching kids for you. So when I'm teaching adults, I'm all about student-centered classrooms. So basically, my goal is to talk as little as possible in the classroom and to get students talking and interacting with each other as much as possible. But I teach mostly adults, so that's entirely possible because there are basically no behavior issues. And adults obviously have quite like much longer attention spans. But how about teaching children? Are kind of like radically student-centered classrooms possible, or does it have to be a bit more teacher-centered? Or so like, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. It depends on the level. Like obviously when I was teaching at the sort of high level Hagwon, we had a maximum class size of 6. And they were really high level. So in that case, it was almost more of trying to shut them up so we could move on with the lesson, because all of them, I couldn't do like, if you're talking in English, that's fine. Cause they were like, okay. And then they would stop talking at the end of class, so it, had to sort of keep moving them along. When I taught in the public schools and I would have, I think I had 50 students in one of my classes, but that was like a weird case. Usually it was like 40, but even 40, 40 fourth graders is a lot. What really helped was segmenting the lesson. Like I said, moving along. Also keeping everybody with like working at a table and pitting the tables against one another, which I think is now sort of going out of favor, but I found it worked really well. If I had a point board on the whiteboard, like just a little section of the whiteboard, each table had a team name, and you could get points or you could lose points depending on how you were doing in the lesson, how your group was staying on task. And then, once, at different schools, I did it different ways. And sometimes it was, at the end of the month, the winning team got a little, each person got a little prize out of a prize box. And others, it was, might be at the end of the week or at the end of the day would have like the, team of the week or team of the day, and there might not have been a prize. It depended on the school, because if there were like 40 kids in each class and I was teaching, like 6 classes a day and I had, 30 classes a week, I wasn't really prepared to buy that many prizes.
Oh, yeah.
So at some schools, I did have a budget. So the school would buy the little prizes. And I'm talking like, a colorful pen or a cute eraser or a little booklet of stickers or something, like things that were like $1 each, but $1 each by that many kids is it adds up.
It does add up for sure.
So,
I did a very similar thing. So I used to teach at kids camps, like during the breaks from my uni job. So I'd have this group of students for like 1 week or 10 days or whatever. And I used to do a very similar thing. I guess bribe them into like good behavior. So I would
yes.
buy these kind of like cool prizes, like a really nice yo-yo or like hula hoops, or just like
Oh,
I would
wow.
spend probably like I had maybe like 12 students in my class. I'd spend like $100 or like more than $100. And then I would often like bring one of the prizes in each day and just kind of as like a showcase, like, oh, this someone can get this. So then I'd write all their names on the board and then I would give, like a star or whatever for like just like good classroom things. Like maybe we played a game and they won, or I saw someone who just went out of their way to like do something kind for a classmate, or just like cleaned up quickly without complaining, or just
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever it was, or just positive behavior. And then at the end of the week everybody got a prize, but the top student got to choose the first one.
Oh,
So
right. Okay.
it was actually so good. It was like it was worth my $100 every time.
Yes.
I felt like, in terms of like good behavior and like low stress for me in my classroom. And I try not to take away points, but I would if I have to deal with like extreme
Yeah.
bad
I would
behavior
only
for
take
sure.
away points if like an entire table was off topic and like distracting others as well.
Mm-hmm.
And generally speaking, that would be mostly the fifth graders, which was usually the oldest that I taught at a school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They had kind of reached the point where they're like, oh, this is just a free period. And I'm like, no points for you.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, anything that I saw that was good, you know, students going above and beyond in terms of really diligently working on a lesson, students helping each other without, being asked to, whatever. Like you could get an extra point for pretty much anything more than breathing, you know.
Exactly. Exactly. If I said, who wants to like collect all the worksheets, and then I'd have like 12 hands, me, and
Right.
like, and I would always choose like the person with the lowest stars. I'm like, okay, it's you. This is your chance to get
Yes.
another star.
Your moment to shine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna move on to my
Sure.
next little tip, which is having posters in the classroom. Like if you can decorate your classroom however you want, especially with lower level students, put up useful posters in and amongst the other stuff. Things like, may I go to the bathroom? Or I'm thirsty. Little phrases that the students are likely to forget and also likely to need. That can be helpful, and that's
That's a
also more helpful if they're not allowed to use their first language. So, if you're supposed to have an English only environment and they're, just to avoid them, just shouting out in their first language, toilet, whatever. But also, I would have in my posters, I would have a picture of a student with their hand up to
Mhm.
also visually remind them to raise their hand.
That's super helpful. And it's also worth mentioning for beginners. It's worth teaching classroom language.
Oh, yes.
Open your books, page 11. I have to please, or like bathroom, I have to go to the bathroom, or like clean up, and things like that. So I would spend a class or two definitely doing that and then practicing that extensively. So that will just make the rest of your course go far more smoothly if everyone is kind of on the same page of
Yes. Yeah.
classroom talk.
Yeah. Those are very important. And I think that moves smoothly into my next one, which is concept checking. Please, please, please. First of all, with young learners, do not give a big block of instructions. Okay, y'all, today we're going to talk about nouns. So you need to pull out your books and your notebooks and your pencils,
Oh.
open your book to page 35, and open your notebook to a clean piece of paper. No,
Mm.
just no. One thing at a time. take out a pencil, take out your vocabulary book, open your book to page 35.
Mm-hmm.
And when you ask your concept checking question, it should never be, does anybody have any questions? Or do you understand what to do?
Oh, yeah.
You need to say, okay, what page are we on?
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
And you need to sort of have the students, choose a student, and without being too obvious, choose a lower level student rather than the top of the class, and then you have a better gauge of whether or not the students really understand what they're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely give your directions at the atomic level, like really the tiniest little piece of instruction at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that's been done, move on to the next piece of the instruction.
I always tried to do mine in two forms. So I would have it written down like step by step.
Yeah.
And then I would flash, like one thing on the screen, like pick up your pencil. And then I would say it and gesture it. I guess I did it in three ways: pick up your pencil, open your book. Then I would do the gesture, I'd say it, it would be on the screen. So there was no way to misunderstand my instructions, I hope, in most cases. Yeah.
Yeah. And another thing that can be helpful at the beginning, like before class starts, if you have space on your whiteboard, if you have space on your whiteboard, make a list of the things the students will need that day, or at least the things the students will need to begin class. So if they have 2 or 3 textbooks, put on the board the one textbook they're starting with. If they need to take out their crayons, put that on the board. I will say that if they need their crayons, but not till later, don't put it on the board.
That's a good tip for kids, for sure. Yes.
So yeah, you want them to have, like, usually you only want them to have exactly the things they need right for that moment on the desk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's helpful for them to know like the things they need to start the class with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would often like write kind of the agenda on the board for the day. And students would like do quite well. Like everybody would read it, at least the adults that I taught would read it. And then they would kind of get ready for the first thing. If the first thing was like, like review page 7, a lot of them would have page 7 open, ready to go. So it's like, it's worth it, definitely writing a few things on the board. And even if like half the students are ready to go, that just makes your life easier, because then it's only half that have to get kind of on the same page.
Right. And anything. Also you can build that into your sort of greeting chat, hi, good morning. How are you today? Oh, that's great. How have you been? Okay. Now go ahead and take out your vocabulary book when you sit down, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I think the next thing I want to talk about is pair work or group work. I love to move between individual pair work and group work. I think it keeps the class moving along pretty well, especially when you have like a long chunk of the class time is meant to be spent basically on the same activity. It breaks it up really well. And it also kind of takes the pressure off, if the students can just have a minute to think and work on their own at their own pace. Mm-hmm. And then also, of course, getting them to speak to one another, like each of those is helpful to them. And there's really 2 ways that you can do it, sort of mindfully. You can either put your pairs or groups with high students matched with low students, or high students together, middle students together, low students together, like that. And both of them kind of had their pros and cons. Like if you have higher students together with lower students, the higher students can like reinforce what they know and also help the lower level students. On the other hand, if you have leveled groups or leveled pairs, you can give like more attention to the lower level ones as you're like mingling around the class. and, kind of observing what they're doing. And while the higher level students are able to sort of get on with things to a slightly greater degree, you can spend more of the class time as needed with the lower level students.
Yeah, and I like to mix it up, I guess, throughout the course as well. Yeah, I definitely I have some empathy, I guess, for the very high level student who's stuck with the lowest level person in the
Yes.
class and never really gets to actually practice with what they are capable of because they have to like lower their level for that person to understand. So I think that's fine for like a few classes, but then also I love to put the best students in the class together once in a while so they can actually like practice to their full ability. And yeah, so mix it up for sure.
Yeah. Yes, mix
Don't
it up.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
also mix it up. Like, I don't like to have the same kids working together all the time.
Mhm.
I like to put different pairs and different groups together, just as a matter of course. I think it keeps things a little bit fresh and sort of keeps them on their toes. And also, then, if there's inevitably students who don't really get along that well, or last week they were friends, but this week they hate each other, whatever. If the groups or the pairs change, then there's less hassle with that.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't really love everyone sitting with their BFFs.
No.
Um, I mean, they can see their BFF at lunch and then recess and before school and after school and on the weekend and at nighttime. They don't necessarily need to have their BFF beside them during English class because it just leads often to talking in the shared first language.
Yes.
And oh my God, I got a text from whoever. And like, I don't know, just it leads to a whole bunch of things that I don't really want happening in my English classes unless they are both quite good students and they're like, okay, we'll talk in English together and they are having fun with it. That's kind of a rare case I found. Generally, it's
Yeah.
better if they don't know each other super well because then it's like they'll just speak in English together because that's what the teacher told them to do. Um, Generally, is my experience with that.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I don't think I really had too many teaching situations where I had students who didn't know each other pretty well, just
Mm.
because, my first school was such a small, or, this Hagwon was such a small school, or, such small classes. So some of those students had been studying together for 3, 4, 5 years. Um, and then when I was at the different elementary schools, a lot of them had been going to elementary school together from the beginning. So,
Mm.
they were together with those same classmates, all day, all week, all year. And I was just there, 40 minutes, 1, 2, or 3 times a week. So,
That makes sense. Yeah, definitely that makes sense for sure. All right, Jennifer. Do you have maybe one more thing we can talk about?
ooh, one more thing. I guess learn your students' names if it's
Oh,
possible.
yeah.
Um, Obviously, that's easier in a class of 6, and especially if you're teaching the same kids, year in, year out. The larger the classes and the less frequently you see them, and the more classes you have, the harder that it gets. But yeah, really do make an effort to the greatest extent humanly possible, um, to learn your students' names. It really helps to create a rapport with your students. And at the very least, if they're totally not into it, then at least they know that you know their name and you can
Mhm.
report back to the powers that be
Yes.
who,
Well, I
who
have
is
the
causing
ultimate tip.
trouble.
I have the ultimate tip for the name thing. I would always get my students to make name tags. So I would bring just like sheets of printer paper, and then
Mhm.
you just fold it into like a triangle, like a three
Yes.
little thing to have standing on front of your desk.
I used to
And
do
so
the same thing.
I would always say like you can like I'll call you whatever you want. So like a nickname or an English name or your Korean name. And most students chose their Korean name, probably like 95%. of them did that. But if they chose a nickname or an English name, I would just write that on my attendance sheet. So I had it connected to their
Yes.
actual real name. And then I would just require that everybody had their name tag every class. So they would just put it in their textbook and then just pull it out at the beginning of class. And that was one thing to like train students. And if they didn't have it, then they wouldn't get their point in their attendance book, which is like a
Ooh,
big thing at university. So,
yes.
I mean, they were motivated. It was like the easiest thing for me because I had like something like sometimes 10 classes of like 30 students or 40 students. So,
Yeah.
remember, and I would see them once a week for like 2 hours. So
Yeah.
it was tough to remember names, but it would just created a way better atmosphere that I was able to like call people's names and like actually, if they were struggling or like behavior was a thing or they were doing really well, I like knew who they were. And yeah, it was super helpful to do that.
That's also a really good tip because I know a lot of my friends who teach in university that have like some sort of electronic check-in. And they would have their friends, like somebody would be on time and they would sort of electronically check in their friends as being
Mm-hmm.
there. But if you see what name tags are on the desks, then you know better.
Exactly, exactly. And I would often just not do attendance as a class. I would get the students like working on some review activity or warm up kind of thing. And then I would just quickly like scan the classroom and actually just do
Yeah.
attendance that way. And I didn't like waste class time with it. And there was no
Yes.
way you had to physically be sitting behind your name tag.
Yeah. So I
So
guess
that was a good
that's
way to combat that.
yeah, final thought is if you are required to keep attendance, which I think generally speaking you will be in some way or another, yeah, try not to eat up class time with attendance. And if you know your students' names or you have them all with name tags on their desk, you can do it while they are attending to some task.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't, you don't have to spend 5 minutes, student A, are you here?
Ugh,
Student
I hate that.
B, are you here?
Exactly. And if you have a co-teacher, that's like great co-teacher task. Just when you're getting everyone ready for their first activity, or your co-teacher is doing that, one of you is just walking around checking name tags and just doing it that way. So yeah, it's a super simple but helpful thing to do in the
Yes.
ESL classroom. All right, Jennifer. So if people want more tips about this, Jennifer and I actually have a book. It's called ESL Classroom Management Tips and Tricks. We wrote it for teachers of students who are ages 6 to 12, and there's a ton of routines, activity suggestions, ideas, advice, helpful tips, just everything you need to know basically
The most
to
helpful book
manage.
you'll ever find.
Oh, yeah. And I was just actually looking at the reviews right now, and people said some good things. So
Ooh,
the book was pretty brief, but loaded. I applied the tips and techniques right away. And though it will take time, I already see and feel an improvement within a week of applying.
yeah. Um,
So yeah.
yeah, nice
So check it
praise, but
out.
also it is true. Like getting routines to be routine takes time, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like anything else. Like if you say, right, I'm going to do, couch to 5K. Well, getting into that routine of getting up every day and going for your run, whatever, like that takes time for you to make into a habit. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all classroom routines are really. They're just
Mm-hmm.
classroom habits.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jennifer, for all your helpful tips.
My pleasure.
They're great reminders for me for sure. I think when I teach kids, I sometimes like, oh, this is really I get overwhelmed and like stressed out sometimes. But yeah, just keeping that in mind, having a routine and planning each little step and the transitions can go a long way to making the classes even better.
Yeah, it really can. You never want to have dead time in
Mm-hmm.
class because that's
Mm-hmm.
when the students will be lost forever.
For sure. For sure. All right, Jennifer. So where can people find you online?
You can find me on YouTube, Teach Travel Learn. And if you have any interest in doing like brain breaks, like I mentioned, doing something where they're moving in English, I do have a couple of brain break videos. And you can also find me on my blog, teachtravelearn.com.
Perfect.
And where can people find you?
They can find me at eslactivity.org, and all the podcast information is eslactivity.org/podcast. All right, Jennifer, I think that's good for today. Thanks so much for all your tips.
All right. Thanks, Jackie.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Bye.